Trajiste tereré, trajiste tereré. Así María me contento. La tereré, tereré,
Fuerza zorra.
Zorras unidas jamás serán vencidas.
¡Hostia! ¡Hostia, un sorry! Yo me quería subir. No, bueno,
Mirá, acá quedaría...
O sea, simplemente soy una persona normal, un humano funcional, vivo mi vida como un humano normal, simplemente tengo esos momentos particulares en los que soy un perro. Pero es algo totalmente por fuera de lo que es lo... O sea, no sé cómo explicarlo, porque es, o sea, simplemente vivo mi vida como un humano normal. Simplemente tengo momentos en los que soy un perro.
Como Argentina dentro de todo viene siendo un país bastante libre, digamos, los Terians empezaron a salir a los parques, todo, y empezaron a hacer entrevistas porque la gente ve a alguien con una máscara y una cola de animal y dice, che, ¿qué es esto? Quiero saber qué está pasando acá, quiero entenderlo. Entonces van, les hacen entrevista a un Terian, a un furry, lo que sea, y es cuando se empieza a dar a conocer todo el tema. Y como se empezó a dar a conocer, los Terians se emocionaron más para salir porque dijeron, wow, la gente me está dando reconocimiento. Entonces...
Agarra la macetita, marinera.
Voy a seguir intentando dar vuelta.
Dale nomás.
Las historias de cada uno, que no viene al caso, digamos, contar cómo es la historia personal de ella, determina que en algunos momentos ella se sintió atraída por estas identidades y ella toma una de estas identidades y que no es la única. Bueno, a partir de eso empiezan a ver juntadas y empieza a ver que no es solamente un fenómeno, primero eso, que no está loca.
At a time when the United States is witnessing one of its most aggressive immigration crackdowns in modern history, with more than 2.5 million deportations carried out across the country last year and refugee doors slammed shut to those fleeing war, famine, or political persecution, U.S. President Donald Trump is making an exception, not for refugees from Gaza, not for families escaping wars and conflicts in countries like Sudan, but specifically for white South Africans, reportedly. New documents from the U.S. Department of State reportedly reveal plans to process as many as 4,500 refugee applications per month from white South Africans alone. The Trump administration has even started installing trailers on U.S. Embassy grounds in Pretoria to help facilitate admissions. The 4,500 monthly target raises many questions because Trump has publicly set the total global refugee ceiling for 2026 at just 7,500, meaning the single group could, in theory, consume nearly the entire annual gap in a matter of months. So why this exception is the immediate question, and what does this policy actually signal about America's immigration priorities in 2026? Let's just break this down for you. Most white South Africans reportedly are members of the Afrikaner community, descendants of mainly Dutch, French, German settlers, or English-speaking white South Africans who descend from British settlers. Both communities once ruled South Africa under apartheid. When Trump returned to office, he immediately halted refugee admissions as part of his broader immigration crackdown. Weeks later, he created a special pathway for white South Africans, claiming they face systemic violence in the majority black nation. South Africa's government flatly rejecting that accusation, saying there is no evidence of organized persecution against white South Africans, and calls the genocide narrative as fundamentally unsubstantiated. According to a Reuters report, around 2,000 South Africans had entered the United States under the program by the end of January. But admissions accelerated sharply in recent months, with roughly 1,500 arrivals in December and January alone, compared to just 500 in the previous 6.5 months. Huge jump there. Even so, bureaucratic hurdles remain because of the sweeping refugee ban issued in early 2025. Each South African requires approval on a case-by-case basis from the U.S. Department of State and the Homeland Security Secretary. While internal delays have reportedly created a growing backlog, the U.S. State Department even paused refugee travel for several weeks due to operational constraints. Trump, in the past, backed by South African-born entrepreneur Elon Musk, has repeatedly claimed that white citizens face systemic discrimination in post-apartheid South Africa. Claims of a targeted genocide against white South Africans, though, have been widely discredited.
It looks like the cartels in Mexico are on heightened alert after the killing of El Mencho. It seems that many of them are in a position where they're not only fighting other cartels at this point, but now they got to deal with the Mexican army coming in, working with the United States and their intelligence, whether it's CIA or the military. They're helping them large scale do things on the ground. Now, this is strategic for the United States as long as they can keep the Mexican army working in this, because largely a lot of the blowback will come right onto the Mexican army or the police there and not spill over into the United States, which is what they're warning about right now. Now, these cartels are ruthless, and some of them in their areas, they run what they describe as extermination camps, poised to turn that local area into how they want it run. And if people don't listen, they disappear. The guy that you see here in the middle, he's off the streets right now, but he's one example. He is the one called the stew maker. They found between 14,000 and 15,000 bodies on his property alone. This man was known for disposing of the bodies for the cartels and getting paid like $600 a week to do so. Thousands and thousands of people missing in bodies spread across these different properties. So they're definitely ruthless, and these wars, they've got them kind of paranoid. Some of the groups coming together, and you're really dealing with here the new generational cartel. That's the main one that just really fired up big time. But then you're also dealing with the Sinaloa cartel in the region, Los Zeros, the Gulf cartel. You got all these cartels going at it, fighting over territory, and the CIA admitting that now they're helping the Mexican army come in and make these moves. So I expect to see more drone strikes, more big moves, and blowback on the border area. I would really pay attention to the border towns like Tucson, El Paso. Those would be the places, San Diego. Those would be the places at the top of the list here for action, because we can already see what's been going on in Tijuana. I would keep an eye on that area as well.
With our experience in these situations, it's not that order is immediately restored or the cartel or affected organization simply stops operating. That's not true, and that should also be noted. The organizational structure and strength of the Jalisco New Generation Cartel remains intact.
Sí, fíjese que sí, eso es.
The holidays are coming, and I think it will also affect us somewhat in the upcoming World Cup. Jalisco will be singled out a lot.
Va a ser señalado mucho Jalisco.
I have so many years of experience working here. When something happens, business goes down and takes time to recover.
Recuperarse.
We looked right down at the corner block, right down below us, and we saw men with masks on, guns in their hands, stopping vehicles, pulling them out of their vehicles, and then lighting those vehicles on fire.
During that time, Williams says a woman who works where they're staying went out to get food for those unable to do so themselves.
I couldn't believe that, she kind of risked everything. I think she spent her own money to go and do this. Wasn't asking for any money in return, which of course people gave her anyway. I think it's kind of a little bit of a waiting game to see exactly what the next steps are. But right now, everybody is as safe as can be.
The U.S. now investigating after the White House confirms an American citizen was among the 4 people killed by the Cuban Coast Guard.
Stephanie Bennett joins us now from London with all the details. Hi, Stephanie.
Good morning, Todd and Carly. Yeah, at least one U.S. citizen was killed and another injured during that deadly shootout between Cuba's Border Patrol. Now, it happened just about a mile off of Cuba's northern coast. Others on board are also believed to be lawful permanent residents of the U.S. Cuba's Interior Ministry claims the 10 individuals on board the 24-foot stolen Florida speedboat intended to carry out an infiltration for terrorist purposes and were armed with assault rifles, handguns, Molotov cocktails, and had camouflage uniforms. Well, Cuba also says most of them have a known history of criminal and violent activity. A brother of one of the victims told the Associated Press he had an obsessive and diabolical quest to end Cuba's communist government. While on X, the Cuban embassy in the U.S. says when border guard troops approached the vessel for identification, the crew of the violating speedboat opened fire on the Cuban personnel, resulting in the injury of the commander. As a consequence of the confrontation, 4 aggressors on the foreign vessel were killed and 6 were injured. Secretary of State Marco Rubio said the Department of Homeland Security, Coast Guard, and others, including Florida's Attorney General, are investigating.
It's highly unusual to see shootouts in open sea like that. It's not something that happens every day. It's something, frankly, that hasn't happened with Cuba in a very long time. And I'm very, very confident that we will know the full story of what happened here, and we will know it soon. And then, we'll respond appropriately based on what that information tells us.
And of course, this comes at a sensitive time between the U.S. and Cuba after Venezuela's president was captured. The Trump administration cut off Cuba's main oil supply, and they're struggling to get fuel right now. But all eyes on getting some more information out of this as we're hearing lots of little pieces.
Following a developing story where the U.S. military reportedly used a laser to shoot down a border protection drone over Texas. Members of Congress are not happy about this. It comes just weeks after the airspace around El Paso, Texas was suddenly closed, sparking confusion and some chaos. ABC's Nicole D'Antonio explains.
Overnight, concern and outrage after a group of congressmen announced the Department of Defense mistakenly shot down a Customs and Border Protection drone near El Paso, Texas, prompting the FAA to restrict flights in the area around Fort Hancock.
For the Department of Defense to shoot down a Customs and Border Protection drone would demonstrate a shocking breakdown in air domain awareness.
In a joint statement, 3 Democratic congressmen saying, "Our heads are exploding over the news." They claim the Trump administration has sidestepped a bill that would have trained drone operators and improved communication between government agencies, including the FAA and Homeland Security. But the administration says it's working to mitigate drone threats by Mexican cartels and foreign terrorist organizations at the U.S.-Mexico border and insist the engagement took place far away from populated areas and there were no commercial aircraft in the vicinity.
in geographic areas where military and civilian law enforcement aircraft are working together, there's always good communication and coordination. So it's unclear to me why at the southern border right now that type of coordination doesn't exist.
Earlier this month, an anti-drone laser was deployed by Border Patrol without FAA coordination. That prompted the temporary closure of airspace over El Paso. One source said the laser was fired at a balloon, while the administration said it was fired at a Mexican cartel drone.
I don't want to hear the spin. I don't want to hear the cover up. I want to hear the facts. We saw how the lack of coordination between the FAA and the Department of Defense can lead to widespread confusion.
No, I don't think there's a lack of communication. We all know each other well, and we all communicate well.
Nicole D'Antonio, ABC News, Washington.
Senator Tammy Duckworth, a Democrat on the Aviation Subcommittee, called that drone shoot-down alarming. She is demanding an independent investigation.
All right, so let's start with some breaking news that's coming in from the U.S., where the State Department has announced that Secretary of State Marco Rubio will be headed to Israel on Monday. America's top diplomat will be headed to West Asia at a time when countries including the United States are pulling their diplomatic staff out of the region. The State Department's announcement said that Rubio will go to Israel on Monday to hold talks about the American priorities in the region. Now, this, of course, means Iran, but Rubio will also be discussing Lebanon and the American President Donald Trump's 20-point Gaza peace plan. The State Department has also mentioned that Rubio will return to the United States on Tuesday. This short trip comes as the United States has told all non-essential embassy staff in Israel to evacuate amidst the rising tensions with Iran. Tehran has threatened to target the American bases in West Asia and Israel as well if Trump goes ahead with the strikes on Iran. The rising tensions have also prompted the United Kingdom to recall its diplomatic staff from Iran, and China has issued an advisory to its citizens urging them to evacuate from Iran as soon as possible. So as the threat of an all-out war increases, the American Vice President J.D. Vance seemingly tried to reassure the American public. He insisted that there was, quote-unquote, no chance that the military strikes in Iran will result in the United States being involved in another years-long drawn-out war in West Asia. All right, now joining us on the broadcast, we've got our correspondent Susan Tehrani, who's joining us live from New York. Susan, this is an interesting and an important visit by Marco Rubio. Tell us, what are we to expect?
So according to the State Department, Marco Rubio was expected to travel to Israel on Saturday. That trip has been postponed to Monday, which coincides with possible talks, at least they're confirmed for now. We'll see what happens during the weekend, between the United States and Iran regarding technical issues regarding Iran's nuclear program. These talks are indirect, but nonetheless, it's noteworthy that the Secretary of State is planning to go to Israel. Now, the State Department's official read says that he's going there to talk about Iran, Lebanon, and also President Trump's 20-point peace plan regarding Gaza. But many analysts are wondering, first of all, if anything happens during the weekend between Iran and Israel and the United States, will this trip be postponed, or is this perhaps the beginning of end of those nuclear talks and the two sides could ultimately reach a deal? So the timing, rather than the trip, is more significant than not.
Indeed. Thank you very much, Susan Tehrani, for joining us with those updates then. Tensions between Afghanistan and Pakistan have escalated again. There are reports of a second wave of retaliatory attacks by the Afghan forces against the posts of Pakistan's military that have reportedly begun at the Dandpatan district of Paktia. Reports say that the military has now fired mortars into the civilian areas. Meanwhile, in Kosh, the Afghan forces have launched similar operations. Reports also say that the Afghan forces have carried out a new round of attacks on the Pakistani military positions in the border areas of the Kosh province, and the Afghan troops have launched a series of retaliatory strikes in the Pakistani border posts along the demarcation line in the Zazai Maidan district, as well as the Ali Shir and Tirazai districts of the Kosh province. No information on casualties has come forth so far. Now, all of this, of course, is happening a day after Pakistan and Afghanistan had launched strikes and counter-strikes on each other. The Pakistani military says that 274 Taliban fighters have been killed and more than 400 have been injured by the Pakistani attacks. The Afghan army had warned that if Pakistan tries to invade Afghan soil, then it will be met with a decisive response. These, of course, are the latest bit of updates that are coming in with respect to the hostilities between Afghanistan and Pakistan, and there are reports of fresh hostilities that have broken out between the two nations, where there has been a second wave of retaliatory attacks back and forth between the Afghan and the Pakistani forces, and these attacks are predominantly focused in the Dand-Patan district of Paktia. The reports further say that the military has fired mortars into civilian areas. Meanwhile, in Kosh, the Afghan forces have also launched similar operations. Reports say that the Afghan forces have carried out a new round of attacks on Pakistani military positions in the border areas of the Kosh province, and the Afghan troops have launched a series of retaliatory strikes on the Pakistani border posts along the demarcation line in the Zazai Maidan district, as well as in places such as the Ali Shir and Tirazai districts of the Kosh province. At this moment, there are no reports on casualties yet. This, remember, is a developing story. More updates are expected, and it now remains to be seen as to where this particular round of confrontation is headed, because in the last 24 odd hours, the two nations, which one point of time had been very close, especially the Taliban that was mentored, trained and looked after by the Pakistani intelligence agency, the ISI, is now a security challenge for Pakistan. And this is what is playing out in this confrontation between the Afghan Taliban and Pakistan. The reason as to why the two nations are having a go at each other is because Pakistan clearly accuses Afghanistan of fomenting trouble inside the country using the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, which is a outfit which comprises of many smaller organizations that has been carrying out repeated attacks against the Pakistani state.
इन फजाई निशानों में 22 मकामात पर काबुल में, कंधार में, पक्तिया में, नंगरहार में, खोस्त में और पक्तिका में टारगेट्स लिए गए. All these targets were very carefully selected based on intelligence. They are military targets, and great care was exercised so that there is no civilian collateral damage. आया कर चुकी है. ताम जो अफगान तालिबान रजीम है, अब तक इसमें 274 तालिबान रजीम के अहलकार और ख्वारिज जहन्नम वासिल किए जा चुके हैं. 400 से जायद जख्मी हैं. अफगान तालिबान रजीम की 73 पोस्टें मुकम्मल तबाह की जा चुकी हैं. 73 पोस्ट along the Pak-Afghan border have been totally destroyed. Other than that, 18 posts are in our possession. They have been captured. Other than that, अब तक एक मोहतात, और ये कंजर्वेटिव हम एस्टिमेट्स आपको दे रहे हैं, एज पर कंजर्वेटिव एस्टिमेट्स 115 टैंक्स, बख्तरबंद गाड़ियां और अटरली पीसेस अफगान तालिबान रजीम की फोर्सेस की तबाह की जा चुकी हैं. इन हमलों के दौरान जो ऑप्रेसिव अफगान तालिबान रजीम हैज टू मेक ए क्लियर चॉइस. द चॉइस इज टू चूज बिटवीन TTP, BLA, Daesh, Al-Qaeda, the terrorists and the terrorist organization, and between Pakistan. They have to make this choice. ये बात हुकूमत पाकिस्तान वाज़ेह कर चुकी है. It is not something new that I am saying. ये बात इस फोरम से
tracking at this point, China has now urged its citizens to evacuate Iran. In fact, the state media announced that all Chinese citizens should avoid traveling to Iran right now amid the escalating tensions between Tehran and Washington. And all Chinese citizens presently in Iran were asked to evacuate as soon as possible. That's the latest just coming in amid the tensions in West Asia. In fact, China joining that long list of countries that have urged their citizens to leave Iran amid the worsening security situation and amid those tensions. In fact, the US has engaged in a massive military buildup around Iran. We've been telling you about that. This while nuclear talks between the two sides have been taking place. The third round of talks just concluded in Geneva earlier without a deal. And Iran is urging the US to drop its excessive demands in order for a nuclear deal to get finalized. But in the latest, the US has also issued an advisory for its embassy staff in Israel as the possibility of strikes looms large. And amid those tensions, Iran and the US are also set to resume technical level discussions in Vienna next week. So that's the latest coming in at this point, the way things stand. In the latest, China also urging its citizens to leave Iran given the current situation.
A billboard. Not a missile, not a speech, a billboard. But you know what the message was on it? Explosive in the heart of Tehran at the busy Palestine Square. A giant display has grabbed the global attention. It was really bright. It was really fiery. Impossible to ignore. It labels Israel a clear target. And then comes the line that stunned the observers here. America's 51st state. You know, what does this mean? It is not geography, it is symbolism. A way of saying that Israel and the US are inseparable. And if one acts, the other one is involved. That is Tehran's narrative. The two move as one. And you know what the image was? Burning buildings. Yes, dark skies and the phrase, "Welcome to the hell." Why now? Because tensions are rising. US naval deployment in the region are increasing. Military options are being openly discussed in Washington. And Donald Trump is reportedly reviewing strategic choice on Iran. At the very same time, nuclear talks are expected in Geneva. Diplomacy on paper, deterrence in practice, two tracks running together. The message behind the billboard, that is psychological warfare. Not fired from a launcher, but printed in massive letters. It signals defiance. It signals readiness. It signals that Iran wants its position seen, not whispered, because when messages go public at this scale, they are meant for multiple audiences. For domestic viewers, for Washington, for Tel Aviv, and for the region. In fact, the timing is strategic here. As military ships move through the tense waters, as missile defenses stay alert, as intelligence agencies monitor every satellite image, a billboard becomes more than just propaganda here. It becomes part of a broader signaling game. And the nuclear talks, how can we forget that? Diplomats are preparing for discussions in Geneva. Enrichment level, sanction relief, verification mechanism, but rhetoric is escalating and not softening here. When visuals go sharper, it raises a serious question. Are talks moving towards compromise or towards confrontation? Here's a regional impact. Israel sees existential threat very seriously. Any suggestion of being a target is not brushed aside. The US treats regional stability as a strategic priority for them. Allies in the Gulf, they are watching closely because if rhetoric turns into action, missiles do not stay confined to one border, posturing or warning. Well, Iran has often used public messages as deterrence here, but deterrence works both the ways. If one side signals strength, the other side reinforces readiness and the cycle, it tightens. In the end, here's the bigger picture. This is not just about a billboard. It's about precision. It's about perception of alliances, perception of red lines, perception of who moves first. Because in modern geopolitics, images travel faster than jets and narratives shape decision before weapons ever launch.